Faith.
And I'm Claire.
And this is the physics of softball.
Speed is distance divided by time.
And velocity is speed with a direction. We use velocity in softball instead of speed because when you hit the ball goes in a certain direction, and then you have to run the bases, which are in a direction.
A common way to measure velocity in an athlete in this sport is by running the bases.
Home run! A common way to measure velocity with equipment is the way you hit the ball.
Acceleration is speed divided by time.
The following graph shows the acceleration of when you run the bases.
A force is measured in newtons.
The most common net force in softball is when you hit the ball and the ball's flying through the air and eventually has to touch the ground because gravity and air resistance are pushing on it in different ways.
Two factors that affect the strength of friction in softball are the two surfaces being used and how hard the two surfaces push together.
Example, ball hitting the bat and the ball hitting the ground. Example of static friction in this sport is when the ball is on the ground, not being picked up.
An example of rolling friction in this sport is when the ball is rolling on the ground.
An example of sliding friction in this sport is when someone slides into home base after a home run.
An example of fluid friction is when you throw the ball through the air.
That scared me. The size of the ball determines how fast the ball will fall. Small, it will hit the ground faster because it has a smaller surface area over a wider surface area.
Mass is the amount of matter you take up.
Weight is the amount of gravity pulling you down.
In this sport, gravity affects the ball most. When you throw or hit a ball, gravity will eventually pull it down back to the ground.
Example of Newton's first law is when the ball is flying through the air and eventually gravity will pull it down. Or when the ball is rolling and friction and gravity stop it.
Newton's third law is every force has an equal and opposite reaction.
An example of Newton's third law is when you hit a ball with the bat and the ball ends up going in the opposite direction.
What? Two factors that affect momentum are mass and velocity.
Momentum can easily be increased in this sport by the way you swing the bat or throw the ball.
Wow. Last one.
Joules are equal to kilogram meters squared over seconds squared. An example of kinetic energy in this sport is throwing the ball.
Kinetic.
An example of potential energy is when you set up to throw the ball.
Potential.
An example of mechanical energy in this sport is the process of setting up and throwing the ball.
Mechanical.
I'm Faith.
And I'm Claire. And that was the physics of softball.